What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Elemental Gardens. Today's already the final episode of this very short series, and today I'll be working on the sort of air/wind elemental part of the park, and also the fire part, which is gonna get ridiculous, but we'll get into that later. First, I wanted to finish the sort of air part, and I figured the one ride that is best to place over here is the 4D coaster, which I made during Planet Coaster College about the 4D coaster. I was originally kind of figuring could I go for an invert or a flying coaster instead, but I think the 4D coaster is at once a very interesting ride that sort of already has that very flying feel to it, and it's also the only roller coaster that I had a finished blueprint of that I could put in the park and kind of show off that way. I also think it's a really interesting coaster and definitely one of the more interesting coasters in the game, so definitely good to show off in that sense. Now, to kind of create the backdrop to fit with the theme, I took some inspiration from the movie Up, actually. Paradise Falls, which is the place where the house sits and has this very large, winding sort of table mountain top that ends with one rock sticking out, and I thought that was a sort of way to build up a scenery backdrop for this coaster that is at once a nice scenery backdrop that kind of fits the theme, but on the other hand also a good way to have some actual scenery interaction from the 4D coaster, because when these things are built in real life, they're usually just built on a flat plane, they're very compact, and it's almost impossible to really theme these coasters. So I think having a sort of very narrow tabletop-ish mountain is something that kind of fits the theme, while at the same time being one of the rare things that you can actually have scenery interact with when it comes to a 4D coaster, which has a very, very small footprint and is very compact. It's also kind of interesting. It's a bit like those Venezuelan mountains, which Up is inspired by as well. I'm pretty sure that Paradise Falls from Up is inspired by Angel Falls, the waterfall in Venezuela, which happens to be the highest waterfall in the world, and it's really these mountains which are very flat on top but have extremely large and steep cliffs on the sides with all of these huge caves and everything, and I think it does get the idea of something that is very much very focused on the sky. I guess something that really rises up without going for floating islands, which is something which I didn't want to do in this case, since it would just break the immersion of the park and make what is so far a somewhat realistic park into something that isn't really realistic at all. So I figured this was the best way to keep the entire park within that theme and also show off some of the terraforming in the game, because obviously this is a pretty interesting way to use the terraforming tools, which I haven't really done in this park yet, and it kind of just shows off how you can make some mountains. So I'm just pretty happy with how that overall turned out, even if it is very simple and this is really all there is to the backdrop of the coaster. The rest of the queue and the station will just have a sort of generic, sort of form-fitting and idea-fitting station, but not really themed in any sense. And since the rest isn't so much themed, I think having the backdrop of the rock works quite well. It also still does fit the sort of foliage style that I have in this park, since in the end I did choose to go with the tropical biome. I don't have too many palm trees, since that's something I generally want to avoid unless you're building a jungle, but realistically you don't really see any theme parks, especially of this kind of scale, in the kind of climate where you can see a lot of palm trees. So instead I kind of want to go for something that's a bit more like it could be somewhere in Middle America, or perhaps somewhere in a Mediterranean-ish area, which isn't as arid as some of the coasts of Morocco and Spain are. Basically any place that is more subtropical than actually tropical. And I guess in terms of the foliage style, having this kind of rock fits in as well, because it does get accentuated with a few palm trees here and there, and it still has that very lush, very bright sort of sand texture, which I really love about the tropical biome. When it comes to the textures, it's one of my favorites. But at the same time, it's not too tropical. It doesn't turn into a rainforest, which is a very common sort of trap whenever people build tropical parks, is that you end up with parks that are filled with palm trees absolutely everywhere. But especially in a theme park, and especially in many climates, that's just something you wouldn't really see. And even if you do, many palm trees will often require quite a lot of maintenance, so they're not too often of a sight of any theme park. Anyway, I wanted to get into the station, and again, since all of these stations so far have been sort of uniquely themed to fit the theme that they're in, so I wanted to come up with something new here. And I figured one way to get a station done quickly and with not too many pieces would be to get a very modern style that also kind of emulates a sort of flying, waving style to it. And what I figured would work in the end was just a waving blue roof. Now I didn't want to take the in-game like curved roof, since there is one blue color that you get with the roof, but you can't actually change the color of the roof, and that makes it quite difficult since the shade of blue didn't really fit the overall feeling of this coaster, I felt. And also I didn't want to use any pieces that you cannot recolor, because every time you see them in any park that anybody's ever made, they always have the exact same color, and I think that's kind of uncanny. I wanted to go for something a bit more unique here, so I made the roof out of the sort of roof edge pieces, those ridge pieces where I think you're supposed to put them besides roofs, but in this case they make up the entire roof. And while that does give this building a lot of different pieces, it's not the greatest thing for the performance of the park, it does mean that we get an interesting color and also a very interesting sort of metallic texture to the roof as well, so I'm quite happy with how that turned out. And it's not too hard to do it either. You can actually keep the roof on the grid as long as you first place one of those very small roof tile tops. I don't actually know what the name of that piece is exactly. Hold on. Let me actually check in the game what the name of that piece is, because there's one roof piece in the roof trim section. Here we go, it's called the square roof tile ridge 1 meter, and when you place that in any building you get a 1 meter grid instead of the standard 4 meters, or if you make the grid smaller, 2 meters. And especially in cases like this, it can be super handy to have an extra small grid. So that's a place, an item that you just have to place inside a building, and you instantly get a very small grid. So yeah, it's just overall very handy little piece that I decided to make some misuse of in this case. So that's that for the station, and now I wanted to move into this side of the central piece of the park, and to sort of again emulate what the landscape looks like on this part of the park. I made a very small sort of table mountain here, with a little bit of detailing on it, a little bit of texturing to make it really emulate the look of the larger one, while at the same time hopefully still keeping it in the sort of scale that the rest of this part of the park has, and that the rest of the little themed quarter circles have. So we have the small pond, we have the small little pits going down, then we have the small table mountain here, and now we get into the fire part, which is absolutely stupid. This is so weird. This is basically the fourth element, and it's gonna be fire. I mean, what else could I put in there? The thing is just, it's the one element that you don't really have with the in-game terraforming tool, so I figured, yeah, what's the only other thing that I can add? Flamethrowers. So that's all we really have. There's more of an idea behind it though, because I of course wanted to show off some of the things that you can do in the game, and what I haven't really shown off yet are the trigger effects. So that's something I wanted to put on these poles over here. In hindsight, I could have actually triggered some of these flamethrowers over here with some coasters as well. That's something I didn't end up doing. But in the rest of this part, I will be making a very fiery coaster and put some flamethrowers on that, because that's just pretty epic. And that's really the theme of this area. It's super stupid, but it was the only way that I could actually like finish off the theme of the park that I have so far, while at the same time showing off another aspect of the game which I haven't been able to show off yet. So for the coaster of this area, I chose to take the Planet Coaster College coaster on the Premier Launch Coaster, which is pretty much full throttle. I do have to say this is different than the real full throttle, since it enters the loop in a different direction. That's the only thing that is different, like the loop is the other way around. That aside, it's pretty much just a recreation of the layout, so it's pretty lazy in that sense. But it's it's a little bit different. I wouldn't call it an entirely correct recreation because of that reason. If you really want to recreate Full Throttle, you're going to have to actually build the loop like backwards, because you can only build a loop in one direction on this coaster in-game, and that is a different direction than Full Throttle was going, so that's kind of interesting. But I think it's a coaster that fits, because if there was any coaster at all that I would give a ridiculous, over-the-top, stupid theme that completely doesn't fit, it's Full Throttle, because it kind of has that in real life. I actually remember I got some weird comments that when I uploaded this coaster on the workshop, because it is on the workshop as the Planet Coaster College coaster, and when I uploaded it, I called it YOLO coaster, and I've got some comments about that. Reason is that Full Throttle, for some reason, was marketed using the word YOLO, which is so odd. Like, it feels very, hey fellow kids, how you doing, kind of uncanny. It's really stupid, but it worked, I guess, because it's a pretty popular coaster, and it's very well known now within the coaster community for just being that roller coaster that was marketed with YOLO, and with people like just still, I believe, liking to scream YOLO on the coaster, and that's kind of why I put that as a name, and that is also why I figured if there's one coaster that I'm gonna be stupid with and put flamethrowers on the side of, then it's gonna have to be Full Throttle. Like, nothing else is gonna quite fit that sort of overblown ridiculousness. So this is gonna be ending up a coaster with 3 launches. We have the first launch into the loop, then we get into a backward launch which goes up from the half loop, and then after you go back to that backward launch, and you have a forward launch into the top hat going over the loop here, and finally into the brakes. I did make one other change that Full Throttle doesn't have, which I believe makes this coaster better than Full Throttle, which is that Full Throttle actually gets brake down during the hill at the end of the coaster. So just as you think you're gonna have to have an epic drop at the end of the coaster, it's actually gonna brake you right as you're going down the drop, which is I mean, I get why they did it. They have some space constraints over there, but it's just a massive, I guess, anti-climax, since there's this really huge drop, and the drop at the end of Full Throttle is positively pretty big, but you're just being like slowed down the entire way down, and that's just kind of shame. So I decided to put the brake run at the end of the hill here, which does make it longer than in real life, but hopefully that should make the final drop a bit more interesting. So that's one more change. Now, as decoration around the roller coaster here, I chose to put some flat rides around it, which should make it a little bit more fancy and actually make it feel like it's a bit more part of the park. And that aside, there are just lots of trees to make sure that this isn't just a park in the middle of an entire empty grassland, and we actually have some tree lines to keep you from seeing that empty grassland. And finally, it's about time for the station of the coaster itself. Now again, I wanted to have some kind of new style, but much like the other stations, this is again a very modern station, but also much like the other stations, I wanted to work a bit with the color here. So I'm gonna choose a color which is pretty much the same as the color of the coaster itself in the very near future. Just go with some orange metal-ish textures and hold them up with some of those modern like frameworks, as I did with the station of the Mine Train coaster. And this is actually also inspired by the simple Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 custom scenery sets back in the day. It's very simple to build, but it looks quite clean, and it really fits the modern style of the coaster, so I figured, why not? And just put a modern sort of station in there that way. It's very simple again, and especially since it's a very small station, it doesn't really stick out too much, but hopefully it works. And I guess the very final thing, as an addition to this coaster, are the long-awaited flamethrowers. And these are going to be triggered so that when you're going to be launched, you can actually see the flamethrowers being like shooting out the fire as you're going through the launch, which is ridiculous and maybe not even that healthy. But hey, it's something that you can do in the game, so might as well try it. I'm also not too sure about how close some of the trees are to some of those flamethrowers. I tried to put the trees out. Jesus, my English is really bad today. I tried to put the trees out a little bit more so that hopefully they wouldn't entirely be scorched, but I'm still not sure if there are any specific guidelines on distance between flamethrowers and any near flammable materials. Probably are somewhere, but it's something that I didn't want to really have to worry about too much in the park here. I just wanted to have flamethrowers. And finally, there's still some of the work that I wanted to do to bring the entire park together and get some detail in areas where that wasn't before, which mostly meant getting some lights in on every single pathway and also getting some foliage in. I didn't record all of this. There was still some of the parts that I added some detailing to that I didn't record for this episode, so you'll actually have to see that in the final cinematic video, which is just under a minute long and that I made as a promotion of the park, or in the final park tour, which I'm going to be making, in which I'll have a real-life walkthrough through the park and show you everything in some more detail and with some more attention. Anyway, that is just about it for today, so thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.